Let's finish up 12.2 part 1 by asking ourselves, what does K do? We've looked at what A does, right? What does K do? And we're going to start with a parent function y equals 1 over x. And then what does H do? And we're going to compare them to the very basic portion. We're just saying y equals 1 over x. And then we're just going to add a k plus k, right? And in this situation, what we'll use is y equals 1 over x plus 3. And we're going to compare that to our parent function right here, which I usually do it in blue. Let me stay consistent. And when I look at what h does, I'm going to use y equals 1 over x, but I'm just going to extend that just a bit, and so I can fit an h under here, but we're not going to mess with an extra k here, and we're not going to mess with an extra h here, because we want to see what this does without too much complication. So y equals 1 over x, and here we're going to do a minus 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw our parent function in 2 coordinate systems. So I'm going to draw 1 over here, and 1 over here. X and y, and x and y. And I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 3, 4. Okay. And the first thing I have to do is put my parent function back in. And just a reminder, our x and y values, if x is 1, y is 1. If x is negative 1, y is negative 1. If x is 2, y is 1/2. Oops, I forgot that. If x is negative 2, y is negative 1/2. And then finally, if x is 1/2, x is 2. And if x is negative 1/2, y is negative 2. All right, so I am going to start by drawing my parent function in both graphs. Try to draw this one a little more neatly. That's what happens when you're going too fast, right? Okay. And this is my function y equals 1 over x. So first I'm going to see what happens if I add a k. What if I add a 3 here? And to do that, I have to draw, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw what happens to x on the positive side and what happens to, x and y on the negative side. Okay? So positive side, if x is 1, I can see 1 over 1 plus 3y is 4. If x is 2, I get 3.5, right? Because 1 over 2 is 1/2 plus 3. If x is 3, I'm going to get 3 1/3. So let's see what I've got so far. 1, 4, 2, 3.5, 3, 3 1/3. Okay, it looks like it's approaching, right, something right there. And then, so let me try a smaller number. Let me try 1/2. 1 divided by 1/2 is 2, plus 3 is 5. So here I have to go up 1 more, and I'm going to do 1/2 5 right here. And here is my first branch. Now let me look at my second branch. And so as I often do, let me start with -1. So 1 divided by -1 is -1 plus 3 is 2. So -1, 2. And now let me try -2. If I put in -2, 1 divided by negative 2 is negative 1/2, plus 3 is positive 2.5. So I'm going to be here. And I know that if I put in negative 3, I am going to get, see, negative 1/3, so 2 2/3. So this is getting a little closer to some value, right? So let me try, as I did here, a small number. Let me try negative 1/2. And you can just try to fit it in here. This should say negative 1/2. The 2 is kind of hidden. 1 divided by negative 1/2 gives me negative 2, plus 3 gives me 1. So negative 1/2, 1. And what I can see is here is my other branch right there. So I can see a couple things here. So first of all, I can see that this whole thing has gone up, right? It's gone up by 3 units. The other thing, I don't know if you can see, the y value is still, y is still the correct, equals 0, right? The y-axis is still the correct asymptote, but the other asymptote has now changed. Do you notice that the number that they now no longer can hit is no longer y equals 0, but now y equals 3. And so you can see that this has been a vertical translation. By 3 units. Right, you can see that this branch went up by 3 and this branch went up by 3. And you can see that the asymptote here is at y equals 3. Whereas this one, right, is still x equals 0. Sorry, is y equals 3. Okay, now that's what happens when you have k. The whole thing gets moved up, or if k is negative, down by 3. Well, what does h do? Well, we know what it's going to do because we've seen what it does before, and it's going to move things to the side. But let's look and see what happens, okay? So as I did before, I'm going to do a little table of x and y values. I'm going to do the positive side and the negative side, okay? So let me start with 0. Now, one of the very interesting things here is that you can actually use 0. And that signals the fact that x equals 0 is no longer going to be the asymptote, because the 0 value here is going to be allowable. So if I put in 0 for x, I'm going to get negative 1/2 for y. So 0 for x, negative 1/2 for y. If I put in then a 1 for x, I get 1 minus 2, so negative 1 on the bottom. I'm going to get negative 1 for y. What happens next? I do a 2. Well, I realize I have a problem. I cannot put in a 2 because 2 will get me 0 on the bottom. So that is undefined. And what I have done is I've found then my other asymptote, which is x equals 2. In other words, the value that is not allowed is no longer, as it was before, x equals 0, but now the one value that's not allowed is x equals 2. So let me keep going and see what this looks like. So 2 doesn't work. Let me try 3. If I put in 3, I get 3 minus 2 on the bottom, which makes 1. 1 over 1 is 1. Okay, so if I graph 3, 1, I'm here. Interesting. So I have 1 point on this side and 2 on that side. I'm going to use this other table on the right to try to equalize things. Maybe find another point here and a couple more points here. So let me see. Since I only have 1 point here, let me find more. Let me try 4 in for x. 4 minus 2 on the bottom is going to give me 2, so that gives me a y of 1/2. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. And let me try an intermediate value. So 1, 2, let me try 2.5. So if I try 2.5, 2.5 minus 2 is positive 1/2. 1 divided by 1/2 is 2. So if I put 2.5, I'm going to get 2. I can see right away now I have my correct, at least this branch of the asymptote, and it's here, of my hyperbola, and you can see it's getting closer and closer to the y equals 0 point and closer to the x equals 2 point, but never touches both. And you can see that it's shifted over from here to here, so it's shifted over sideways or horizontally by 2 units. Let's see if we can finish up this one and find another point. So I'm going to try, since it looks like it's doing that, I'm going to try this point here, which is 1.5. If I put in 1.5, I get 1.5 minus 2, so I get a negative 1/2. If I have 1 divided by negative 1/2, I'm going to get a negative 2. If I have 1.5 negative 2, that's exactly the right shape. And I can see that my parabola, my hyperbola, 1 over x minus 2 is a, and I'm going to write it here, a horizontal translation by 2 units. Okay, I've moved this over by 2 units to the right. Okay, so we have now really looked at everything. We've looked at what does A do? It does a stretch or a shrink or a reflection. And then we've looked at what does K do? It does a vertical translation. And we looked at what H does, a horizontal translation. We've also looked at the fact that when you do a vertical translation or a horizontal translation, you change the asymptotes, the values that this hyperbola is not allowed to be. I'm going to end there and pick up with part 2 of this lesson tomorrow.